therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein
Science! Science!
I know the human being and
Science!
can coexist peacefully.
This was thou findest.
Hey guys, this is Petri Dish. I'm Nathan.
I'm Sean.
And you're joining us for our two-part series on climate change. Important trigger warning, climate change is real. If you really aren't willing to believe that, this is going to be a very upsetting 2 hours.
Yeah, so I think if you're a hardcore climate skeptic, then I'm sorry, dudes. Like, the next two episodes are just not going to work out for you. If you're somebody who maybe isn't sure if climate change is happening, or if you think it's happening but you're not sure if people are doing it, or maybe whether we can do anything about it, then I think you're the kind of people who could really get something out of these next two episodes. So I hope you stick around, even as it gets kind of dismal.
Although, a quick reminder, you did just listen to an episode where we showed you that fucking elephants made fucking Africa. Yeah. And if elephants, Dumbo, can make Africa, and we're 7 billion of us all over the world, I don't think it's that much of a stress that we can put gas enough in the world to mess it up.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair, but we're going to go into the details. So part one, we're going to be talking about, is climate change happening and are people responsible? Spoiler alert, yes. But we're going to go into some details. We're going to try to be convincing about it. Nathan's going to bring his sass mouth, and we're going to get into it.
So Sean, first, tell me, apparently climate change has an ancient history of understanding going all the way back to 1827. What is the history of climate change? Theories.
Yeah, so 1827, if people have listened to our previous episodes, was around the time of the leech craze in France. And maybe the acupuncture craze in France also.
France was popping off. Orientalism, at least.
Right, and so, in 1827, a French fried potato named Joseph Fourier, who's actually a pretty famous mathematician with the Fourier transform. But whatever, anyway, he wrote a paper in which he basically suggested that human changes to the environment could result in temperature changes over the course of centuries. At the time, he kind of thought it'd be a positive thing. Like, it'd be like, oh, how nice that it's going to be.
Europe was very cold.
Yeah.
And it was like a cold winter in Paris, tale of two cities. And he was like, fuck, man, I hope it gets hot.
Yeah, there was like Oliver Twist shit going on, you know what I mean?
Please, sir, some climate change, please.
Yeah, so then a little bit later, in 1856, this American broad named Eunice Newton Foote.
Very good looking. Foot.
She basically put together an experiment where she figured out that carbon dioxide can function as what's now termed a greenhouse gas. So it can kind of increase heat from absorbing infrared radiation.
I think science ladies are so fucking sexy, dude. Right under music ladies, Stacy. But right under Stacy ladies, awesome science ladies.
Yeah, I buy that.
Yeah.
And then, still over 100 years ago, 1896, we got this sexy Swede named Svante Arrhenius, and he hypothesized that basically human industrial production of carbon dioxide could cause global warming, the warming on this global scale because of how much carbon dioxide we're putting out.
Which is all interesting to me because occasionally you hear someone who doesn't believe in climate change say like, oh man, these people are funding these scientists to make us believe in climate change, which is like kind of weird anyway. But like this is not a new idea that like Jimmy Carter and a couple lizard people cooked up in 1978 at the Department of Energy. This is like a very old idea that has become an old hypothesis that's becoming increasingly true.
Yeah, I mean, this goes all the way back. These dudes were Freemasons. These are French Freemasons running around.
Epstein.
So I think that point is true that, you know, if you want to think about it conspiratorially, you really have to kind of stretch it way too far back for it to be realistic. Scientists have been talking about this, you know, early on way more theoretically. But then, starting in the 60s and 70s, really getting the climate data to show that, hey, things were starting to get toasty and things were starting to heat up.
So let's talk about some of that climate data.
Yeah, so, you know, I think people hanging out there listening to CNN or NPR or something might hear any particular year being the hottest year on record, right? And I think that, that might be convincing to some people that like, oh shit, like I keep hearing that each year is the hottest year on record. But
it might even make others cynical, who are like, they said last year was hot too.
Yeah. Or they'll be like, oh wow, this was supposed to be the hottest year, but it like snowed.
Right.
In like March. So there's no like, what's
Can't
the
be
deal
that
with that?
hot.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to emphasize is that climate change is at least what we're doing right now, is a multi-decade process. And so even if, 2020 or 2021 is not the hottest year, maybe it's a little bit cooler or something like that, that doesn't mean that the trend isn't that the whole world is heating up over these decades. So,
right.
So this decade was hotter than the last decade, was hotter than the decade before that.
And in the aggregate, right? So it can be cold on fucking Mount Everest, and it could be super hot in Texas. What we're doing is we're aggregating temperatures over the entire globe.
Over the entire globe and over the entire year when we're talking about this averaged temperature.
So it's entirely plausible that it still has snow somewhere in the world.
Yeah, it could still snow somewhere. So we have these really big trends, and if you look at the trends on sort of a graph, you see it really, really start to take off around the time of the Industrial Revolution, which is coincidentally when we were also burning a lot of shit and putting up a lot of gases into the atmosphere. And so, right now, at this point, it looks like we're going to be about 1 degree Celsius elevated compared to Shakespeare times. Okay? And 1 degree Celsius doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, one of anything doesn't sound like very much.
Right.
But the point is that this is over the entire globe. And that includes like way out in the ocean, on top of Mount Everest, all of those places on average, 1 degree hotter actually can mean a lot. It can mean that, your buddies in Texas, they're going to be real toasty in the summer.
Right.
And it means that places in Africa might experience more drought and stuff like that.
Right. Sometimes I wish we just called it global weirding, right? Because the 1 degree destabilizes the climate patterns that we're used to. And so 1 degree might equal 20 degrees hotter in one place than expected in one summer, and a really crazy winter in Chicago in one particular winter.
Right. So some scientists talk about what's climate instability as this facet of climate change. But, the original term global warming wasn't really a bad one, because even though the climate is going to get more unstable, you will see some things like freak cold summers and stuff like that. On average, everywhere on Earth is going to get hotter over the next few decades. Everywhere.
And Sean, if I may ask for the viewers out there, what is getting into the world that is making it hotter?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mainly, we're talking about gases that are entering into the atmosphere and are basically preventing heat from the Earth from going out into outer space.
Right. We're taking in too many carbs. I see that in your notes. Explain that.
Okay, yeah. So there's this energy in, energy out idea when it comes to dieting. And so some people are like, oh, well, you want to be burning energy in about equal or more than you are eating energy in. So we get our energy from the sun, okay? We don't super change how much energy we're getting from the sun. It's just hitting us and we just take it, all right? But a lot of that energy bounces off the Earth. It can bounce off of clouds, for example. And then some of the energy comes into the Earth, gets absorbed by the ground. And then some of it gets reflected back out from the ground. And so the kind of key question is, how much of it gets trapped in by our atmosphere? And that atmosphere, a lot of times, one of the biggest, it's called greenhouse gases, is actually water vapor. Water vapor is one of the strongest greenhouse gases. It's just, we don't really change how much water vapor is in there. So when you look at like human sources, the amount of water vapor is pretty much the same all the time. The ones that have been changing a lot, the ones that right now are at a higher level than they've been at any point in the past 800,000 years, is carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide.
Now, Sean, let me ask you, has it been super hot before 800,000 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Were those good times to be human?
Well, luckily we weren't around. They would have been annoyingly hot all the time.
Right.
The Earth has been through cycles, like on a large enough scale, the Earth has been way, way hot before. The Earth has been temperatures that would be in the 150 degrees Fahrenheit range at surface temperature. At that time point, everything was living underwater, so it was kind of not that big a deal, right? You have a bunch of fishes swimming around, and they could stay down where it was cool.
And they also evolved to be in that environment.
Right.
And what's important, right, the key difference between the heating now and the heating in the past, because it's been hot before, is that now it's heating within like 200 years and now within decades, whereas back then it used to heat over like hundreds of thousands of years, right?
Yeah, usually millions of years.
Okay.
So usually the time scale we were talking about was millions of years, and now we're talking about like 40 years.
Yeah. Within like the runtime of a day soap opera.
Yeah, so basically, I do want to say before we get in too far to the human side of this, there are natural ways that the climate does change.
Right.
So I mentioned that we don't really change very much about how much sun energy comes in. That's not totally true. The sun is on an 11-year cycle where it gets brighter and dimmer. Right now, it's getting dimmer, so the fact that we're still heating up is not a great sign. Volcanoes can change how much of the sun's light reflects out at the very beginning when it hits the atmosphere, because volcanoes shoot up a bunch of the shit into the stratosphere, and those particles can reflect sunlight. So volcanoes cool the Earth down. Now, we can't really rely on volcanoes exploding all the time to make it cooler when we fuck up. So
Lego Movie Ninjago.
Where's the supervillains that we need to set off the mega volcanoes to save us?
I've once heard if you throw a single Ted Cruz into a volcano, it erupts for 100,000 years.
We're gonna get like the Secret Service or some shit sent to
I'm not saying you do it.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying in the historical past, when you've done that, it works.
Yeah, so there are these natural mechanisms that can cool down and heat up the Earth and everything like that. But right now, the greenhouse gas effect is so large that it really drowns out these other natural cycles. So we're going to take a break, and then when we come back, we can talk about these greenhouse gases, how they work, and where they're coming from.
When Ted Cruz burps. My name is Tyler Jerry. You may know me from such edgy travelogues as A Lonely Sailor's Guide to Bangkok and Man Parts Unknown. If you're like me, you love a hot and hotty ride in a rickshaw. There's no better way to explore former colonies in style. Then you go home, stuck in your dingy Kia, and doesn't it make you wish you were riding a carriage, pulled by some thick dandy? Then mount up, missy, and download Rickrods. It's like Uber, but you'll be picked up by a hot rod and a sexy rickshaw. We hire only the strongest and sweatiest men to pull your ride, so anyone who sees you will know you're queen bitch. Don't fuck with me. I've got a rickshaw. Some would say, why a rickshaw? They're slower than basically anything else. Those people are pussies. They don't get power. So leave the ride sharing to them. Our gents are eager to take you where you need to be. Hail 'em and ride 'em all the way through town with Rickrods. Download today. Okay, guys, so welcome back. Maybe you've heard in the mainstream media about quote-unquote greenhouse gases. There's CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, the halocarbons, which I think are in ice cream now in California.
Yep.
But, Sean, why are these gases from greenhouses? What's going on here? What do they do? What's the term? Why are they killing us all?
Yeah, all right. So the way that this works is basically we have all of the sunlight coming in. Earlier I mentioned kind of this idea of calories in, calories out. As an analogous situation. It has a term in climate science. It's called radiative forcing. Okay? And the way that radiative forcing works is that if you have more sunlight energy coming in through our atmosphere to the Earth than is leaving us and going out into space, if you have more coming in, then that means that the atmosphere will get hotter. Okay? It's just kind of a natural consequence of not enough heat leaving us and too much coming in. What happens with greenhouse gases is light coming into the Earth will hit all of the stuff on the Earth's surface. Okay, so that could be grasses, that can be trees, water, or it could be man-made things. concrete, asphalt, right? And those things can get hot and then radiate the heat out as infrared rays, okay? And these infrared rays might make it out of the atmosphere all the way into outer space. And hey, that's cool, because that's not energy that we have anymore, right? But a lot of those rays will instead hit things in the atmosphere, different gas molecules. A lot of the times, those gas molecules are things like ozone or water vapor. But more recently, there's been a really, really huge increase in some of the other molecules, particularly carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and halocarbons. And so the ability of these different gases to absorb infrared energy, so some of them absorb more, some of them can absorb less, and also some of them are up in the atmosphere for longer. Other ones don't last for as long. And so the differences between these end up contributing to this kind of idea of the global warming potential, with air quotes, global warming potential.
Because it's fake.
Of a greenhouse gas, okay?
And all this stuff kind of suspiciously we get more of starting with the Industrial Revolution.
Right, yeah. If you look at the amounts in the atmosphere and everything, coincidentally, as soon as we started burning a lot of shit, we start seeing more stuff in the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide, CO2, is usually kind of the baseline. So they set that equal to 1 global warming potential. Carbon dioxide actually is not as good a greenhouse gas, good. It's not as effective a greenhouse gas as like water vapor or something like that. It's just we keep dumping so much of it out there that it's kind of the main one that people are concerned with right now. So it gets a rating of 1. But compared to carbon dioxide, methane, for example, from all those cow burps, that has a global warming potential of 28 to 36. Okay, so that means that it's 28 to 36 times more effective at being a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
And nitrous oxide is even worse than that.
Right, nitrous oxide's in the 200s, like 265.
Quick caveat, what the fuck is nitrous oxide?
Yeah, nitrous oxide, 2 nitrogens and 1 oxygen.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Fancy Pants, but what makes it?
Right. So nitrous oxide from human production usually comes out of agriculture the most.
Okay.
So it's actually things like fertilizing fields, but also wastewater and landfills will, as kind of the bacteria munch on stuff.
Poop.
Yeah.
Nitrous and phosphates, right?
Will ultimately outgas nitrous oxide.
Outgas.
Yeah. And then halocarbons are actually thousands to tens of thousands times more effective than carbon dioxide. There just happens to be way fewer of them than carbon dioxide. So realistically, even though a lot of these other gases are better at being a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, there's just so much carbon dioxide being pumped out there that really it outweighs all the rest.
Okay, and so we've got carbon dioxide, we've got methane, we've got nitrous oxide, we've got halocarbons, and they're all up from before the Industrial Revolution.
Right. They're all up.
I see this, like, carbon dioxide's up 40%, methane is up 150%, nitrous oxide is up 20%. All these things, we got a lot more of this shit than we used to.
Yes, and realistically, they track really, really well to the amount of industrialization that we've done. So we start to see levels rise really early in the Industrial Revolution, but realistically, those numbers really, really started taking off in the 1970s, and then basically have just been accelerating.
Okay, well, you're trying to tear down our entire civilization, Sean. Just really go for it. What in our current model of society and economics is making all this fucking greenhouse gas?
Yeah, so let's start with CO2, the big one. With CO2, the main source is from burning fossil fuels and making concrete.
That's what I make my money, Sean. I'm a fracker. I'm a fracker by trade. Okay, you trying to put me out of business? Okay, whew, I'm so hot right now.
So actually, fracking I think uses water a lot of times, but there is a way of trying to get extra oil out of oil wells that involves pumping CO2 gas into them, which usually leaks out at some point. So that is a extremely effective way for us to get CO2 into the atmosphere.
And a way to get oil into my car, baby.
But 75% of the CO2 that we emit is from burning the fossil fuels and from making concrete.
Hey, whoa, I need concrete too, dude. My house is made out of concrete.
And you know who else does is China.
Woo!
Oh boy, they're really doing it.
Controversial episode. Won't get released in China.
And so, yeah, I mean, out of all of the greenhouse gas emissions, fuel is a really big part of it. 24% is from agriculture and land use.
Now you're trying to take away my cows? My forest fires?
Hey, man.
What am I going to do over the summer if I'm not burning forests?
Bolsonaro, he's doing it, yeah.
My president.
Because burning trees is like taking carbon that's been fixed into a physical form and then just turning it straight into a gas and burning it into the sky. So,
cool.
So burning trees is a really effective way to release CO2. And cow burps, it's a lot of methane.
Okay, and I see 14% is from transport, like quote-unquote oceanic shipping. Sir, what is oceanic?
Well, I mean, you got to get your Alibaba goods somehow, and a lot of times those get shipped on ships.
Oh, oceanic is ocean.
Yeah, ocean boats.
Do you take pleasure in what you do to me?
God damn it, dude.
Okay, so 14% is from transport, and then 21% is from industry directly.
Right. So this is we're talking about factories and actually, the emissions from like a smokestack on a factory itself. But I would put a pin in that for a second because it's slightly more complicated than that.
Okay. So then 6.4% is from buildings. 25% is from electrical production. What do you mean by that? All these solar panels are actually heating up our planet? Sean, I thought so.
No, not the solar panels, not the... Wait, yeah, why am I having such a hard time remembering what the hydro word is?
Hydroelectric?
Yeah, I guess so. All right.
You stupid son of a bitch.
Yeah. All right,
Keep it in.
That's
Okay, so 25% is electrical production. What does that even mean? Like all the solar plants that Al Gore's trying to make is actually heating up my planet?
Nah, baby. Solar is okay. Solar, wind, hydroelectric, these are all fine. What we're talking about mainly are the fossil fuel sources. Also, I should say, nuclear is not part of the issue here.
I love nuclear power. This is a separate subject, but they're hilarious.
So I'm not talking about nuclear power. What I am talking about is coal power plants, gas power plants, and oil burning power plants.
Man, you have just like this huge target on the way I vote. My lifestyle, sir, and I'm gonna vote against your agenda.
Oh boy.
Hey, well, anyway, 25% of greenhouse gases are from certain types of electrical production, but there's actually more to that story, right?
Right. When you think about the 25% of all those greenhouse gases that are being made to produce electricity, the electricity is just a means to an end, right? Like, no one would be producing this electricity if people didn't want it. And most of that electricity that is being produced is being used by buildings and industry. So, for the Wi-Fi and air conditioning and everything like that in office buildings, but also for your industrial plants, production plants.
So when we say 21%, to remind you guys, 21% of greenhouse gases come from industry, really that number is higher because the electricity we're making, a lot of it's used by that industry.
Right, exactly. 21% of the greenhouse gases are from industry directly. And then there's probably, 18 to 20% extra that is because sort of this indirect effect of all the electricity that they're using.
Okay. So if I remember correctly, you mentioned CO2 a little bit ago. How about methane? Where does most of methane come from?
Right. So not a majority, but a plurality. 30% is from cow burps. Okay. And then after cow burps, in a really close second place, is from burning fossil fuels, particularly gas and coal. And then about 20% is sort of like bacteria burps.
And I see here, 10% is from rice farming.
Yeah, rice farming alone, not even just, plant agriculture. Rice contributes a third of the methane that cow burps do.
I also see now that I interrupted you halfway through explaining bacteria burps. Let's rewind a little bit.
Yes.
You say here 20% from wastewater and landfills. How the fuck does a landfill make methane?
Yeah, like bacteria burps.
What the fuck is a bacteria burp?
Well, the bacteria are basically hanging out in the landfill or hanging out in one of those wastewater treatment plants, and they're just munching on stuff, and they're burping and farting.
Okay, I see now. And then I see here 10% from rice farming. The rice specifically makes a bunch of methane.
Yeah, and rice is one of those crops. It's one of the major grains that feeds, billions of people, and that stuff produces a considerable amount of methane.
Sean, I want to remind you, from your genetic test, you are 12% Japanese. You are, like, whatever the rest of the math is, 38% Korean.
Nice.
And you are 50% Oklahoman.
Yep.
Basically, rice, cows, oil, gas, coal. Motherfucker, you're telling me that 100% of your ethnic makeup is contributing to climate change. You are the problem.
I'm a huge part of the problem. I agree with you. I feel shame every single day since I researched this episode, which was a serious bummer for me.
Okay, and then we got nitrous oxide. And 57% is from fertilizer and manure. 10% is from burning fossil fuels. And 10% of that is from burning biomass.
Right, so that's like the Amazon.
Oh.
Yeah.
Whoopsie.
Yeah, it's not great.
Too soon.
Our emissions levels for 2019, when we look back from a year from now, we're not going to be happy about it. We really fucked up.
But okay, so we've got all this, we have all these greenhouse gases that we're emitting from various behaviors. I see here something kind of weird, though, in that you're saying not everything we do increases radiative forcing. So we do things that actually don't contribute to climate change?
Yeah, so hearing all of this stuff, it's a little tempting to just be like, wow, we just non-stop fuck up when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. But the truth is a little bit more complicated than that. A lot of things that we do might not be great for the environment as a whole, or might be environmentally neutral, but end up actually having a net decrease in temperature kind of effect. Okay, so one of those is how we use land. So one of the things I mentioned about the way that global warming works and radiative forcing works is that you have this light that's getting absorbed and then emitted again out into space, hopefully, and some of it gets trapped in the atmosphere, blah, blah, blah. But when we build cities and stuff like that, those cities usually have a lot of reflective surfaces. Those literally do bounce rays back into space. Cities are usually...
Those are my Ray-Bans.
Exactly. They're kind of like, they're more like mirrors than, for example, forests are. So just based off of that idea, you would say, oh, cities are better than forests.
So we should burn forests.
Of course, forests give you a lot of other benefits, right?
What, like tree hugging? I don't give a shit about that.
We'll talk about this a little bit on what we can do about global warming.
Well, forests are literally carbon.
Right. They literally take carbon dioxide out of the air and fix it into a solid form so that it's not in the air anymore.
So burning them is not a good idea then.
Right, it's counterproductive.
Okay.
But the idea is that, like, cities, especially the kind of shiny reflective parts, pretty useful.
Right.
Asphalt, very not useful, because it's black, and so actually that collects a lot of energy. But on a whole, probably averaged out on all of our land use, we're more or less neutral on that.
All right, so land use neutral maybe, but factories are pretty bad, all that stuff.
Right, so factories are actually a really good example of something based off of what's called aerosol production. And aerosol production...
Sure, Jerry curl.
What the shit? Jerry curl is a hairstyle, dude. I'm just telling you.
It was invented by astronauts for the inside of their suits. We went over this already.
God, it just makes no sense.
Don't let me sidetrack you. So aerosol production. What about aerosol production?
Right, so factory kind of smokestacks, almost in the same way as volcanoes, put out a bunch of particles out into the air, okay? And this is especially true decades ago, before we had sort of like the EPA and laws about, kind of what sorts of pollution you could put out.
Okay, wait a minute. Let's contextualize that. So 1950s, 1960s, we're putting a bunch of aerosol into the air.
Right, and these aerosols could do things like be very unhealthy for you when you breathe them in, and they were also just like tearing the shit out of the ozone layer, okay? Which at the time seemed very disconcerting. But one of the effects of all of those aerosols we were putting up in the air was actually that we reduced the increase in heat.
Okay.
So it didn't make us cooler, but it made it so that we weren't heating up as fast.
Okay, and then we got like 1970, 1971, Richard Nixon is president. He signs the EPA into existence. They put on new environmental protections that cause power plants and factories and shit put out less aerosol, which accelerates global warming. So global warming is made by Republicans.
Yeah, Tricky Dick did this.
Tricky Dick.
Basically, it accelerated global warming. It helped repair the ozone layer, which is nice. And it made it so that a lot of people could breathe air outside, which is nice. But yeah,
You're a sucker for the Republican long game.
It did increase global warming. And so, this is one of those situations where on the global warming side, aerosols were cool. On the human health side and everything, they weren't.
Okay, but what about China?
Yeah, what about China?
I threw you off, didn't I? I got you there. No, but I guess what I'm saying is that, okay, so the EPA does this stuff. America limits its aerosols.
Yep.
But I feel like there's other countries that are doing other things. I mean, is China still making a bunch of aerosol?
Oh, yeah, so when it comes to aerosols, especially the things that were eating up the ozone layer, most countries have stopped, although that does actually remind me that last year there was a mysterious flare-up in northeastern China, probably illegal factories making this kind of refrigerant.
I fucking love China, dude.
So this group of researchers used satellite information to track down what region of China these emissions were coming from and published a paper. And now the Communist Party is probably going to go in and just bust heads in northeastern China.
Hey, they're good at it, dude. The CCP won't let me be.
Broadly speaking, aerosols I think are not as big a thing anymore. But as far as just greenhouse gases go in general, definitely there's kind of regional disparities there.
Well, we talked about all greenhouse gas emissions, which I guess assumes the globe. But some of these things must be more specific to other places. Like America, we got a lot of burping cows, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas you can only imagine Somalia, they wish they had more burping cows. Or that's not politically correct. But in China, those motherfuckers got the rice paddies, right? Like in India, does India even have electricity? How is India contributing to greenhouse gas?
Yeah, so, one thing, we burned through so much information about where different things come from. I do want to still hit home, CO2 is the main dude. Okay?
Right.
CO2, and a lot of that is from burning fossil fuels. Okay? And so in a place like India, for example, where there's not a lot of electrification of the grid.
Thanks, British.
That means that if they were running around, even if they built just a ton of solar panels all over the place, a lot of homes are not hooked up to any kind of way that they could get that electricity. So a lot of times what they're doing on a home-to-home kind of basis is burning coal in stoves.
Dude, hardcore.
And that's not fucking great. Coal is pretty polluting.
It's an interesting problem, right? Because a lot of the increase in emissions comes from a growing middle class in places like China and India. But you kind of need a middle class to grow so that then they can expect and demand electrification, and then you can transition to renewable energy. So we're kind of in an awkward place.
Yeah, so contextually, China is number one right now as far as greenhouse gas emissions go.
Sons of bitches.
And the U.S. is second.
Nah, we're cool, though. We deserve it. Manifest destiny, baby.
And then as far as really big increases in recent years, India has seen very, very large increases in their greenhouse gas emissions, whereas Europe has seen pretty significant decreases in their greenhouse gas emissions. So good for Europe.
I'm not going to thank them.
What?
They take slaves for 500 years and all of a sudden they're great because they switch to renewables. They're using money that they took from other places.
Well, I mean, we did naughty stuff too.
Hey, you shut your sweet mouth, all right? Okay, we're not paid by the Illuminati. Uh-oh. Oh shit, we gotta cut that out.
Please pay us. But here, look. Here's all I'm saying is that, yeah, I agree that China and India are currently in a place right now where you see this big spike. But I think a place, an entire continent like Africa is on the way, right? So if right now we're thinking, oh man, this is rough, we're putting out all these greenhouse gases, but we're going to start improving, right? China is building an insane number of renewable energy sort of modalities of air and solar. So they're really trying hard to switch over. I think China's, at least attempting it. But in some countries where they don't have the money to do that and they don't have the electrification yet, but they do have a really rapidly growing population like sub-Saharan Africa, I think we're going to see greenhouse gases shoot up in those areas, and that's the exact opposite direction we need to be going in.
Yeah. Well, we're going to delve more into that stuff in the next episode when we talk about what's going to happen as the world heats up through different models and how can we possibly solve it. Before then, though, I think you had a closing note on different environments.
Yeah, man, but before that, let's take a quick break because we have our first actual sponsor.
Woo!
We got some copy here. Let's get into it.
Oh man, it's so exciting. Okay. Petri dish is the perfect pod for falling asleep because Sean is a boring scientist whose nerdy crap hits harder than 6 pounds of intravenous horse tranquilizer? Okay, it's your line now.
But then Nathan cuts in like a fucking chimp, screeching all his stupid shit, interrupting your nap.
I was worried about that.
All right.
It's rude.
Yes. So download Kruger. It's an app that takes a pod like Petri dish and cuts out all the loud, abrasive sounds. So you can transform your pods into beautiful, tranquil background noise and rest well.
That doesn't seem so bad. Cut out that nighttime noise with Kruger. Download today from the App Store or whatever Google uses, and let Sean euthanize you into a good night's sleep.
See, I don't like that at all.
We need the money.
Yeah.
Download Kruger.
Well, that was a bummer. Closing statements. Okay, look. Human beings, with global warming and all the greenhouse gases that we've put out, that's just one facet of all of the pollution and ecological damage that we've done over the years. And all of this damage has basically accumulated to really make a lot of different environments and species vulnerable.
We've killed off like a shit ton.
Yeah, we've definitely got rid of a lot of them. But then even the ones left over end up being in these habitats that are encroached upon. They're
Pandas, koalas, we gave them chlamydia.
Yeah, we did. It's well, actually, I don't know if we gave them chlamydia.
Some species of starfish.
So
There's a lot of them.
There's a lot of these species and habitats, ecosystems that are in danger and they're vulnerable, and that makes them less adaptive. And so that means that as global warming gets worse and worse, they're going to have a harder and harder time surviving.
I like it. Survival of the fittest.
Now, maybe if it was just one or the other.
America versus the jungle.
What the shit, dude? Why you got such a naughty mouth?
America's gonna survive, baby. Boom.
Trying to make a point over here. It was all beautiful and heartfelt.
Ah.
Oh, God, you're awful.
So, we gotta wrap this episode up. We've talked about the greenhouse gases. We've talked about all that crazy shit. Next episode, Petri dish. Sean, what are we gonna talk about?
Yeah, man, we're going to talk about what all of this means to your environment, what's going to be happening to us, what you can expect.
Your family, your flag, your country. What's gonna happen when climate change hit?
Yeah, so what's going to happen? And then hopefully this will be a nice note to end on. Part 2 is going to be ending on what can we do about it? What are some of the solutions out there to fight against climate change? So before we do our thank yous, we actually got some listener feedback. The first email that we got is from Dr. Daniel Green, and he wrote us an email asking about acupuncture. So that's episode 4. And he wanted to know what kinds of needles were the ancient Chinese using, because Nathan kind of goes into the fact that all the way back in 200 BCE, that's kind of when acupuncture was born, but obviously way back when, the acupuncture needles probably couldn't have been made as thin as they are now, because now they're like 1/3 of a millimeter or smaller. So these are really, really thin needles nowadays. Dan wants to know what the deal was with needles back then. And so actually, I looked into this, I read a couple papers, and there have been some archaeological findings of acupuncture needles from about the time period when acupuncture was born, around 200 BCE. And they're made out of silver and gold, so real fancy. They didn't have stainless steel back then. But they are definitely much thicker than modern acupuncture needles. They're about 1 millimeter in diameter. And 1 millimeter is about the thickness of the sort of syringe needles that you get blood drawn out of your veins. So imagine those guys getting stuck all over your body, acupuncture-wise. These are much, much thicker guys. I read a commentary from a modern acupuncturist that was saying that maybe the reason why acupuncture nowadays doesn't do as much is because we're using all of these pansy skinny needles, unlike, the ancient days. And so maybe it's just all these people are running around and they can't handle the pain from getting stuck with a millimeter needle. And that's why acupuncture isn't curing all the things that it used to. So if you time travel back to ancient China and some ancient Chinese dude offers to acupuncture you, just keep in mind that we're talking about way thicker needles. And then the second listener feedback that we got is also about acupuncture from a soon-to-be doctor, Matilde Miranda, who emailed us at petridishpod@gmail.com with a Gizmodo article. And in this article, it's talking about a New Zealand acupuncturist who is seeing a patient and has gotten into trouble because they punctured the lung of that patient. So the patient started having chest pains and difficulty breathing. So I looked into this, and the acupoint they're using is the G21 acupoint. It's kind of on the top of your shoulders. And apparently, this acupoint is actually notorious for causing this problem. This isn't the first time this has happened. All over the world, acupuncturists are puncturing lungs by sticking the needle 4 centimeters or deeper into this acupoint, which is far enough to get into your pleural cavity and just literally punch into the lining around your lungs. So if you are going into an acupuncturist complaining about wrist pain and they want to jab you in your upper shoulder area, just ask them if this is the one where they go super deep and poke your lungs. This is a thing that's common enough that there was a paper written by a Korean acupuncturist. So a legit acupuncturist at an acupuncture university wrote an article saying that we should consider how deeply we put needles in at this point because he's pretty sure that we're putting them in too deep. So goddamn dudes. In the episode, we talked about acupuncture as being largely safe. And I think that's true, except for maybe specifically this one acupoint. So be careful if they start sticking things up there. And yeah, if you guys have feedback on acupuncture or any other episode, please email us at petridishpod@gmail.com, or you can tweet at us at dishpodcast.
So, we gotta thank you for joining. Remember, sign up for our Patreon. Now, I've been told many times we can't get you fetal bovine serum, but instead, Sean will come down your chimney and give you some coal.
Wow.
Why does that always make you so upset?
I feel like all of these Patreon sort of like benefits and everything like that are very difficult to pull off.
So please sign up and subscribe. Otherwise, we have to thank Stacy, my wife / Soundlord.
Brian Allen for the artwork that's on our Patreon and our logo and everything like that.
Hey, all you beautiful goddamn listeners out there.
Yeah, make sure, subscribe, rate us on all the places. We're on that Spotify. We're on all the things.
Yeah, Google Play.
Yeah, so thanks for listening, guys, and make sure to check in for part 2 of climate change.